What is the most surreal, this can't be real moment you've ever experienced? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. Delivering pizzas in my 20s and knocked on a door, realized after I knocked that I was at the wrong address. We'll call it 9th St. S. W instead of 9th St. W. So I was exactly on the other side of town from where I needed to be. As the guy opened the door, I was about to do my, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you. Have a nice day" thing I usually do at a wrong address, but the guy didn't look confused and was holding money ready to go. Turns out he ordered pizza and accidentally put his address in wrong, which means I was accidentally at the right place. Our two mistakes perfectly canceled each other out. To this day, I wonder about the actual odds of that happening. It feels like it's way more than 1 in a million. Story 2. I had an incredible urge to go to my employee's house. It was weird and overwhelming. I called my mom thinking I lost my chute and she said to trust my gut, so I went. It felt weird. Who wants their boss showing up after hours? When I got to his house, I heard a faint help me coming from inside the house. I kicked the door in, went inside, and the dude had a stroke 24 to 48 hours prior to my arrival. He was just laying on the floor and would have rotted there had I dismissed that crazy urge. Answer. Something very similar happened to me. I was an early childhood teacher. A little girl in our care wasn't picked up at end of the day. Right on pickup time, I just felt like mom wasn't coming and that I needed to go to her. This is very much not something I would do normally. The feeling was so strong I couldn't ignore it. Arriving at her mom's house, I discovered mom having a seizure just inside the front door. Turns out mom had fallen hard and hit her head on the concrete not much earlier. She was home alone with a 6-month-old. Her husband worked away. If I hadn't gone there on my instinct, it could have been a very different ending. Story 3. Was hiking alone in the mountains when a sudden fog rolled in. Complete whiteout conditions. As I was trying to figure out my bearings, I heard bells jingling, and out of the mist appeared an old man with a staff leading about 20 goats. He nodded at me without saying a word, walked past, and disappeared into the fog with his goats. The entire encounter lasted maybe 30 seconds. Story 4. I was on a trip literally halfway around the world, walking around the city by myself. I popped into a tiny museum. There was only one other person there, another woman about my age. We started chatting. I'm from the US, she was from Australia, and we were in Singapore. She mentioned she'd gone to university in the US. I asked where. Turns out she went to the same small college I had, and at the same time. Got even crazier when it came out. She'd been friends with my college roommate and had been to my apartment. It is a small freaking world. Story 5. I was born in Lebanon during the war in the 80s, had a best friend which I lost track of because we were always running from bomb shelter to bomb shelter, from city to city. I migrated to Canada in '89. And when I got to college, I met that friend again. We were in the same college in the same city in Canada. I didn't recognize him, but he recognized me because my face never really changed. It was the perfect example of, the world is too small. Answer. My father fled war to another country. It was a last-minute do-or-die situation. He had no idea where his parents and siblings were. He had been in university in another city, and his parents did not have telephones. He did not know if they had fled, where to, or if they were still in their homes. They ended up in a refugee camp in the same city where he landed in a neighboring country. He got a job as a clerk for the municipality, and his workmate knew them and where they were living. He was reunited with them. Story 6. I wasn't even looking up when I was in the passenger seat of a head-on collision. All I know is a big bang happened, and when I looked up, it was a red metal wall on fire. I looked to the right of me, and it's open street, and there's debris all over the road. Still, none of this makes sense. I have no idea where I am and why is blood pouring out of my face and into my hands. I am looking, trying to figure out what the burning red wall was for. Then I look to my right again, and a young blonde lady is screaming into a phone. I'm still trying to figure out, why is there a red wall? Then I see a fireman, and he manhandled me a lot. I am jostled around and asked a bunch of questions. Something about my age. I'm loaded onto a gurney, and as I'm wheeled away, I see the whole smashed car, and suddenly I realize I was in an accident. And the red wall was the hood of the car smashed up vertically, and the battery was on fire. Like none of it made sense at all until I saw the whole car. Story 7. It was dangerously freezing temps. I had just gotten off work and was broke. Was $1 short to get on the bus to get home, and it was too cold and icy to walk home safely. My rich dad wouldn't send me the $1 I needed for bus fare. No reason, he just didn't want to. I went to the library to warm up and try to figure out what to do. Grabbed a random library book, opened to a random page, and there was a folded up dollar bill inside. Not as crazy as some of the other stories here, but I was very grateful. Story 8. Hotel cleaning staff came back to the front desk complaining that they couldn't clean a room due to the alligator in the bathtub. Thought I was misunderstanding something at first. I wasn't. There was literally a decent-sized alligator in the bathtub, 3-ish feet long, which in my mind wasn't big enough to eliminate you, but absolutely big enough that I didn't want anyone going back in there. Turns out he was the animal guy for a magic show. The even bigger shock was that when he came home from the set that day and asked why his room hadn't been cleaned, he told us to our faces that there were no animals in his room now or ever. Held the line through an increasingly baffling and angry conversation, so certain that even I started to doubt reality itself. This continued throughout his weeks-long stay. Housekeeping resorted to taking pictures of whatever weird jerk exotic animal he had in there, and he still denied it. At one point started saying his assistant had been in the room all day so it was perfectly safe, but no one would be there. He'd be practically foaming at the mouth pissed over it, which was typical, but the bizarre thing was just this repeated insistence that it was perfectly safe, no animals, and then there'd be a fudge capuchin loose in the room. Story 9. Texting my mom, asking if she wanted me to pick up food for us on my way home from work. I was a huge male body part to her in the morning before I left and felt bad. And having my dad reply 30 minutes later, "Mom's gone, she passed, ambulance are here." She died unexpectedly, here at 9 a.m. when I was huffing at her to get out of the bathroom so I could take a shower and go to work, and then dead an hour before my shift ended. I remember walking in a daze and running straight into my boss and just choking. Don't remember driving home or what was said when I got there. She was inside under a cloth, and all I could see was her feet sticking up. Kept thinking this was a joke or a bad dream. She was only 54, I was 23. I hadn't expected to lose a parent at all, much less on a random Tuesday in October. It still feels surreal to see her passing, planning her funeral, driving up to Toronto to pick up a casket the entire year after her passing. But the scariest part is that I don't remember what she sounded like or what she looked like anymore. She disliked having her picture taken. And I think my way of coping with this sudden trauma was to forget what it was like living with her, because my entire childhood and teens and early adulthood just feels like I'm watching a movie about someone else when she was alive. Grief is weird in explaining that this world is ending for me, but everyone else is going to work and paying bills. Feeling is so strange. Answer, I'm sorry for your loss. I have a slightly similar story. My mom had cancer since I was around 4. It went into remission a couple years later, but came back again when I was 11. It got worse and worse. It was just me and my mom living in a room provided by a member of her church. She was in the hospital a lot, and when she was home, she was bedridden. Well, one day she felt good enough and asked if I wanted to go to the mall with her. I was 13 and in my rebellious phase. I agreed, but I tried to avoid being close to her. She was bald and in a wheelchair. I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed about my dying mom that had cancer. She would end up passing a couple months later. But man, it's been well over 20 years since then, and I still want to throw up thinking about it. The huge amount of regret and disgust with myself eliminate me, but I go on. I hope she knows I truly loved her. She deserved a better kid. Story 10. I had a childhood friend with the same first name as me, which was a pretty uncommon name at that time. We moved when I was young and I forgot about her. I honestly thought I made her up. About 10, 12 years later, after moving back to the same state just in a different county, I went to work at a restaurant with another server who had my name. We became friends and were reminiscing about our childhood. She told me a story of a young girl with her name that lived down the street from her. Turns out we had found each other again after 10 years after both of us forgetting about the other. We shouted enough about it that the manager came to tell us to be quiet. Haha. Edit. Added the word years after 10. Years. Story 11. One spring afternoon on about 2013, there had been tornadoes in Oklahoma in the morning. Being in WMO, I was looking towards two skies for any exciting-looking clouds, and I think we were under a tornado watch. The local news had told of one tornado in OK that had destroyed the attics of several homes and lofted material way up into the atmosphere and was caught in upper-level winds, with some pieces of a roofing, felt, and paper landing here in Springfield, MO. As I walked down our street about 5 houses away from home, I saw something tumbling down out of the increasingly gnarly-looking sky. It came down a few yards away, and I leaned over into the yard to grab it. It was a piece of paper about an inch x an inch. A neatly cut piece of a page from some kind of school textbook. The cut had been through a paragraph, so it was only portions of sentences, but the words were, and causes hot air to rise, the formation of tornadoes. I honestly thought I was losing my mind. I kept it with me for many years until it disintegrated. It sounds just as ridiculous every time I retell the story. Story 12. I had a lucid dream at 16, that I could fly by flapping my arms. I flew around my neighborhood in the mountains and noticed a house with a blue roof at the corner of Pine Ridge and Hook Creek Road back in the late 70s. The dream was so real. I even went looking for the house, found it, but it didn't have a blue roof. My teleportation fantasy was crushed. Just a dream, but so real. 5 years later, I was a crewman on a Forest Service helitech crew. We were dispatched to a lightning strike in my neighborhood. I was hanging out the door of the helicopter looking for smoke when I suddenly had a déjà vu, SP, experience. I recognized the flight pattern from my dream. I freaked because I could predict the helicopter's flight. I predicted accurately the next couple of turns. I gasped as I looked down because the house had a blue roof. I just got big goosebumps remembering. Weirdest shoot ever. Answer: I also always have JERVs, the dream version of Javis. When I had psychiatry, ETA, and neurology classes at my former med school, teacher told us both types of DEJ and JAMV as well can be explained. ETA, in a healthy individual with no known diagnoses such as epilepsy, due to a mistiming of the interpretation of a situation due to being tired and the brain going what? Afterwards, standard medical internet disclaimer, always consult with a real MD to answer health doubts instead of a rando in the web. Story 13. Went to my GF's family's place for Thanksgiving. Like 30-40 people are there. As the food is finally ready, everyone gathers around and they bring out a flag and all start singing the Pledge of Allegiance. Atuasi legit thought, this is fudge weird. Turns out they were pranking me and they got me good. Story 14. Was on Random Acts of Kindness subreddit. A young lady was looking for some love support because it had been a tough year and her birthday was coming up. It was on 9/11. Once we established I wasn't a serial killer, I DM'd asking where I could send a nice car gift. She sends me the address. I stop and stare into space for 2 minutes because I can literally see the building from where I am sitting. It's 2 buildings away from mine. Story 15. Watching the doctor do the brain passing tests on my 41-year-old sister after she had a spontaneous brain bleed Thanksgiving morning. She had huge, beautiful blue eyes, and watching them pry her eyelids open and moving her head to see if they would move, but just staying locked forward was haunting. Story 16. Going to Spain 1 year, then going back 2 years later and staying in the same hotel and seeing the same man both times. I spoke to him, and he had just traveled there both times at the same times I did. Insane. Story 17. About 10 years ago, my husband and I made friends with another couple on holiday. They were also from the UK, but they lived all the way down south, and my husband and I are up north, so about 56 hours apart. We met on a day trip, got chatting, and spent most of the day together, said goodbye at the end of the day, and that was that. A few weeks after we got back home, I started a new job in a car dealership, and who were the first people to walk through the door on my first day? The couple from holiday. Turns out their son attended a university close by, and they had come up to visit him but were waiting for him to have a break in lectures, so just decided on a whim to come and look at some cars. So many different decisions that had to align to make that car dealership meeting happen. It makes me feel funny if I think about it for too long. Story 18. Had a really down and out moment a few years ago. Just totally broke. Wanted to buy flowers and chocolates for my wife for her birthday. It was about 80, has 6 in my account. Sat outside on a bench and got really sad. It was really windy. And like a movie, I was just sitting in this desert town. Something struck me in the face and stuck to me. It was a 100 bill. Answer: I had something similar but less cinematic happen to me. I was in Chicago and had a flight to another city. I arrived at O'Hare Airport with time to spare, only to realize my flight was out of Midway all the way across town and not O'Hare. This was years ago before Uber existed and before cabs took card. And I broke down sobbing because it was rush hour and I knew I didn't have enough cash on me to get to Midway, much less on time. I opened my backpack to grab my wallet and see how much I had. And there was a 100 bill inside just sitting there right on top of the rest of my stuff. To this day, I have no idea how it go there, but I was too frantic to care. I hopped in a cab and I don't remember how much it costed, but somehow I got there with time to spare and told the cab driver, keep the change. Story 19. Doing a puzzle, picking up a piece looking for where it should go. I dropped the piece and lose track of it. Couldn't find it anywhere. And then I realized it fell into the exact right place. No chance of that ever happening again in my life. Story 20. I went into my local pub around the corner for a pint before taking a taxi into the city, went to a random bar, and was served by exactly the same barman that had served me in the pub. Turned out he'd served me as his last customer in the pub and then started a shift at the other bar. I thought he had a twin or something. We both found it really funny. Story 21. MA defense attorney. Last year, I second chaired a week-long takedown trial. I handled the expert witnesses, directing our expert, and crossing the government's experts. My coworker took point on opening, closing, and lay witnesses. We thought we had a very strong case, and my coworker did a great job, especially in the closing argument. Without going too deep into the details, it was a bar fight that went wrong. Guy came barging into a crowd shit-hammered, pushing people and dropping N-bombs. One thing led to another. Guy gets into a fight with a whole crowd of people outside the bar. Estimates are between 10 to 30 people involved. My client, a tall, heavy-set black woman, was accused of kicking the victim in the head while he was down, and they were trying to claim that as the cause of passing. Only 1-2 people claimed to see my client do that, and their sisters who are from a family of known scumbags in town who have a list of crimes longer than your arm. One of them, a little white blonde girl, was caught on tape bragging about how she kicked the guy 3 times in the head and mimicked doing it. We put her on the stand and got her to admit that she lied, and she lied, and she lied to police. We had a witness staying in an apartment above the street where it happened, who heard the commotion and looked out the window and saw what she said was a short white man kicking the guy after the fight was over. She said she figured it had to have been a man because no woman could be that vicious. The jury deliberated for hours. Finally, around 9 p.m., the verdict came back. Guilty on all counts. My client just kept chanting, "No, no, 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 no." Her mom was sobbing in the gallery behind me. My co-counsel was devastated. He looked up at me, and I've never seen him look like that before or since. He had absolutely nothing left, but we weren't done yet. With a guilty verdict, we now had to proceed to the sentencing section and give that to the jury to decide how many years we'd get. I had never done that before. Hell, I had never even seen that phase of a trial before. He asked me to take over from there and handle the witnesses in the closing argument. One look at him, and I could tell that even with utterly no idea what I was doing, I was still in better shape to do it than he was. But wait, the clerk and the judge discovered an error in the verdict. So the jury had to go back and deliberate again on the verdict. Maybe it was a mistake and they meant to say not guilty or guilty on a lesser charge. For another 30-40 minutes, they went back to the jury room. Once again, they came back. Once again, they confirmed it. Guilty on all counts as charged. So my client and her family had to go through the horror of hearing that twice in an hour. Somehow, even though every fiber of my being was telling me that it was a nightmare, and I needed to wake up, and my God, is it hot in here? Do I have to keep this suit and tie on, and that I should just walk out of there and never come back? I got my shoot together enough to get through the sentencing phase. I gave a closing argument off the top of my head with no prep or anything. At that point, it was after 10:30 p.m. We were all exhausted beyond belief. I just spoke from the heart and leaned on the amazing words and stories her family told about her. The jury came back with the minimum on the takedown, which is the only real victory we wound up with in the whole mess. But I will never ever forget that night. I've never had to physically resist the urge to run away like that before. It truly felt like that moment in a bad dream when I realized I'm about to die. But instead of waking up with my heart pounding in my chest, it just kept on going, and it kept getting worse. I'll go to the grave knowing that girl got fudge over. Story 22. Assisting in organ donation and witnessing the moment when a young woman's heart was lifted out of her chest, walked across the OR, carefully packed into a transport chamber, and then carried at a sprint out of the room. Until that point in the harvest, it hadn't sunk in for me that the patient was deceased because she was a DBD, donation after brain passing. So she was warm to the touch and under anesthesia monitoring. Once the heart was out, we packed her chest cavity with ice and continued harvesting the kidneys, spleen, and vessels, and the anesthesia person pulled her breathing tube and left the OR. I remember feeling a chill in this weird slow-motion moment as her heart was lifted out, like I was witnessing something sacred. The OR team was notified later that week that her organs had saved 6 lives, and while I don't know how those patients are doing now, I hope that heart is still beating somewhere. Story 23. Opened my neighbor's locker in high school. The second I touched that dial lock, I knew the combination and entered it in correctly first time. Freaked out and slammed the door shut when I saw girl stuff in it. Went back to mine and input my code fine. I tried to remember her code just to see if I could, and it was a complete blank. Weird. Story 24. Went to a fish show in Alabama and had seats in the back of the amphitheater. For some reason, the usher looked at my ticket and directed me to the pit area. Since I didn't have seats, I wandered around. Finally, I crawled under a rail and sat dead center the seats immediately behind the pit. Guys to my left said, "Those seats are taken." I said, "When your friends come, I'll get up and move." Dude sitting in my right taps my shoulder and says, "Pre-bit torrent, we've traded CDs of live fish shows from an internet message board." He recognized me from a photo. Whoever actually had the seat I was in never arrived, so I watched the entire show in front row seats behind the pit, next to a guy who recognized me from trading CDs. There was also a huge shooting star that night. Sir. I was a teenager living in northern Maine when Fish played a show at Loring, Old Air Force Base, like 40 miles north of where I lived. Mid-late 1990s. There were so many people coming to the show that Route 1 was at a dead stop for like 2 days. People were getting out of their cars and walking around, chatting and sharing snacks and stuff. My house was right on Route 1, so I sat on the front porch with some friends and shot the shoot with a bunch of friendly hippies. It was totally surreal. My dad told us not to take any food from them, LOL. Story 25. Neighbor old lady came over and asked, "Want to see something?" I said yeah, and she told me to grab my keys. It's late at night already, but I just shrugged and got my keys, and she met me at my car. She gave me directions to a farm with a fenced-in area with about 100 cows. We stand outside the fence, and she keeps looking at her watch. At this point, I was sure I was going to get takedown. But what happened next? I still can't explain it. One by one, all 100 cows knelt down. They stayed that way maybe a solid minute or two, and then just got up and started roaming around all normal again. She got back in the car, and after I picked up my jaw, I got in, and we drove home silently. When we pulled in, I asked her what the hell I just saw. She made the motion of zipping her lips and throwing away the key. I went back to the farm several times alone and never saw anything out of the ordinary. I even spoke to an employee for the property and probably looked like a complete psychopath asking the questions I was. She refused to acknowledge anything. This was over 25 years ago. I think about it still. Story 26. I boarded a plane for Greece and had the entire front row of the center aisle bulkhead all to myself. The flight attendant served up a surprisingly delicious Greek meal with a glass of wine. I was having a moment of life is good euphoria I'll never forget. The trip was better than the flight by far, but all the good surprises on the flight were so unexpected. Story 27. Context. I was still living with my parents in GF. We used to sleep in the back room with a window looking out to the backyard. I had a Yeti dog that was terminally ill. One of the symptoms was she used to get up and drink constantly, often until she threw up. Every night we'd hear her walk across the porch. Drink. Okay, so for obvious reasons, we had to put my dog down. Story. The night after my dog was put down, my GF and I would still hear doggy footsteps on the porch and drinking sounds. It was faint, and we would hear it at different times. Subtle enough for us both to think it was just a phantom sound. Fast forward a few days, and it was the Soccer World Cup. I live in Australia, so the games were on extremely early, 4 a.m. My work colleagues wanted to all watch the Aussie game together, so we decided to meet up at work early and watch it. This meant I was leaving for work early. It was unusually foggy that morning, so foggy I couldn't see the garage on the other side of the backyard. As I got into the garage, I felt something bump my leg. It took me by surprise, but was only soft. Then I felt another push. This time I almost fell over. I looked down and my dog is staring back up at me, emaciated, covered in dirt, but wagging its tail and happy to see me. My brain completely broke. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Had my dog dug itself out of a grave to say goodbye? No, of course not. But this was really happening. She was jumping on me. Apparently, while I was thinking all this, trying to process, apparently I was also involuntarily making a weird wailing noise, loud enough that my GF and mom came outside to see what was going on. This confirmed it was really happening, as they also burst out in tears and completely freaked out. Conclusion. So after everything settled down, it turned out that unbeknownst to me, my dog had a doppelganger about 15 houses down from me, exact same markings, just a lot thinner. Apparently she dug here way out of the property and escaped the night my dog was put down. She was living under our house, and the noises we heard were literally her moving around. That morning, she had come out into the fog to greet me. I've been mugged, traveled, and had countless experiences since then, but that was the only time I can truly say my mind was snapped. I literally just made a weird whine noise because I couldn't comprehend how this supernatural event was happening before my eyes. Literally could not process. Story 28. Having a phone call with my mom's attending doctor in emergency saying she's got about 5 chance to live based on the damage COVID did to her lungs. She gave me power of attorney and I had the final say if they had to pull the plug or not. She fudged beat those odds and is still healthy to this day. MF fist pump. Story 29. When a cop knocked on my door and said my mom was dead, she got hit by a car walking home from work. At first I thought it was a joke, then I think I fell on the ground for a bit, couldn't breathe. Then they gave me info while I was shaking. The one investigator gave me his jacket, which was really nice of him. Then I didn't know how to act or what to do. I was the first to know, so I had to call everyone when I couldn't even form a sentence myself. It happened at 3 a.m. too. So no one even answered the phone until the next morning. I think I didn't sleep until like 3 days later, with a bunch of help from my friend Xanax bars. Story 30. I was riding a city bike down 9th Ave. In Manhattan, and the front wheel hit something, and I got thrown over the handlebars. Somehow in that spilt second, a part of my mind told me to lean backwards, and I wound up doing a superhero landing. I am in no way coordinated enough to do something like that if I tried, but to my utter shock, I pulled it off without a scratch. To top it off, when I picked up the bike, I saw someone standing there looking at me with shock, and I had the presence of mind to bow towards them before riding off. Autopilot and adrenaline are amazing things. Story 31. In 2010 or 2011, my wife and I were driving back from a pro tennis tournament in Miami back home to Lakeland, between Tampa and Orlando. The tournament ended late, so we decided to make the 4, our trip starting at about midnight. We were taking rural Route 27, which goes through a lot of small towns that are notorious for speed traps. The speed limit back then went from 55 down to 35 right as you entered each town. My radar detector would go off right at the speed limit sign for about 75 of the towns we went through. It was ridiculous. At one town, I don't remember which, there was only one light which turned yellow right as I approached it. I would have had to speed to beat the red light, but I was suspicious and sure enough got hit with radar. It was weird because there was no other traffic to trigger the light. I looked around and found the cop parked around one of the buildings close by. So I'm sitting at the red light and waiting for it to turn yellow the other way. And it never did. It went from green to red, and then green my way. The fudge cop was controlling the light. I thought that it turning yellow initially was just a bit too perfect timing, and then it skipping yellow the other way confirmed it. I'm pretty sure most folks I've told this story to don't quite believe me. Answer. Leclerc, IA installed 2 new traffic lights on a state highway about 15 years ago, presumably as a revenue source. It has always been an infamous speed trap, but the lights added a whole new level of malice. I saw on several occasions their cops switch the lights directly from green to red via some kind switch on their vehicle visor, usually just as someone was getting off the interstate ramp. They also had yellow light lasting less than a second when they were first installed, though that got corrected within a few months. I think the feature they were abusing was intended for ambulances and real emergency vehicles. Story 32. The day my 13-year-old brother passed, I found out in school after my school counselor safeguarding officer called home for me to find out how he was doing. Seeing her face suddenly drop and her immediately telling me, "We're getting you home," felt so unbelievably surreal. Sitting on the couch being told he had passed felt like I was on another planet. Bodily, I was there, but I just was not. It's the most surreal feeling I have ever experienced. I was just watching it all happen from across the room, and all I remember thinking was, this isn't real, not my baby, not my baby, then blackness. Story 33. Driving in a whiteout blizzard that came out of nowhere and seeing a vehicle flipping headfirst multiple times headed opposite bound on a stretch of the road that was 1 lane each way. There was nowhere safe to pull over and check on them either. I had to drive another 3 miles to work to call the sheriff and let them know. Turns out the driver, her husband, and their 2 toddler passengers were all fine, with just bumps and bruises. They came and ate at my restaurant the next day, and while talking it came up they had an accident. We spoke, and I said I was the one who called it in. It was surreal. Story 34. When my country experienced a massive earthquake that took lives, I had a newborn and 3-yo at the time and was at my parents' house alone when the quake hit. Dad had a lot of old carpentry tools, bricks, and other relics along the shelves in the lounge above me. They all fell down during the violent shaking. I was thrown off my chair onto the floor. My daughter was in her bouncer beneath me, and I crawled over to pull my son from the other side of the floor where he was playing with his cars under me till the shaking stopped. As soon as the earth settled, I picked up my son, carried the bouncer, and ran out into the street. There were alarms going off, people running, cars speeding, and just mayhem everywhere. Oddly, a man walked past me nonchalantly, reading a book as if nothing had happened. My neighbor took me into her undamaged house until my mom came running past, and we waited there for several HRs until my dad got home from work. Traffic was horrific for obvious reasons, to assess the house for structural damage. My dad was a builder. The house was habitable, but a write-off through insurance. What was the most surreal was Dad had taken a photo of the lounge that late afternoon after the quake. Where I was sitting, most of the tools had fallen down onto the chair, and if the force of the quake hadn't thrown me off, I would have been eliminated. My daughter was lying in her bouncer, and she had a clear circle where no tools had landed on the floor, and my son was also in another blank spot where he was clear of any falling tools and debris. Literally, every other part of the floor had something on it. We were so fortunate. Also, Dad never put anything dangerous on the shelves again. Story 35. My 5-year-old daughter was in a parade with her dance school. When it was time to take a group photo, she stood next to my biological half-sister. I'm adopted, also 5 years old. I knew it was a possibility, but to see it was truly bizarre. Story 36. Laughing at funny name ideas, I think the name was Assus Blastus, while doing deliveries for work, then stopping at a customer's house, handing over their food, only for the mother to address her daughter as Blastus or something that sounded oddly similar. Legit thought I was having a stroke. Genuinely, still not sure I heard her. Right, I'll allow. Story 37. Old Wellington pub in Manchester, around 2015. Watched a woman's coffee cup fly off the table and smash on the floor without her being anywhere near it. She was as stunned as I was. She saw that I'd witnessed it and asked if she thought she touched it. I told her definitely not. Her and her friend jumped up instantly and left. Strangest thing I've ever experienced. Story 38. When I was about 16, my then girlfriend and I were walking through a shopping center and passed by this guy what was sitting at a table collecting for some charity. He had long white hair and was probably in his 60s. He stopped me and told me that I looked like I play guitar. I had long hair and did in fact play guitar, just like every teenage metalhead in the 2000s, and that he was looking to start a band. He said that I had the look that he was looking for, and he took out a binder from his bag full of old photographs of him in an Ozzy Osbourne tribute band that he sang in years ago. I gave him my number. I shouldn't have, but I was awkward and bemused and went on my way. Later that night, I was telling my girlfriend's dad, who had been singing in a tribute band himself for years, about the encounter, and he said, "That sounds like Father Francis. He used to sing in tribute bands back in the day. His shtick was that he was a priest and he would dress up in the whole getup and sing Ozzy songs." I thought that was a pretty funny coincidence. Fast forward to a couple of years ago, I'm living down the country and I'm getting out of the car to go into the local supermarket, and a car pulls up behind me and a guy calls out to me, "Hey, you look like Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue." I absolutely do not, by the way. Do you play guitar? It was Father Francis again. He didn't remember me, but stopped me for the same conversation twice, 15 years apart, in two completely different parts of the country. Turns out he was living in the same town that I moved to and was still on the hunt for some band members. I met with him a few times after that for coffee, had some long, interesting phone conversations with him. He had a very interesting life and gave him lyrics to some songs that he was trying to figure out by ear, and told him to call me whenever he gets the rest of the band together. I stopped hearing from him suddenly and found out that he had passed away not long after that. So RIP Father Francis, thank you for the best small world story I'll ever have. Story 39. I was once walking down the sidewalk on Sunset below VD and bumped into what I guess would be a doppelganger that looked just like me and had on the exact same t-shirt in the same color as me, and we both just pointed at each other, said, "Nice shirt," and laughed and kept walking. Story 40. Was browsing through just chatting on Twitch when I saw a dude with a guitar and no views. I joined and the dude was in the midst of an emotional crisis, clearly feeling incredibly low, so I started talking to him. I learned few bits of information about him before he takes out a bottle and downs all the pills. I begin to panic and try to get more info out of him, while wildly scouring the internet for this random dude to try and find someone who knew him and could help. As he passed out on the live stream, I was able to find his website for his old band, which led me to his Facebook, where I messaged a family member. Was able to message them, and they called 911 and an ambulance saved him. I spoke to him when he got out of the hospital a few times, and he seemed to be doing okay. He made good music. Story 41. I travel often through the airport for work. One weekend, I decided to pop my head into the Interfaith Chapel to explore because I had a delay and had never seen it before. When I went through the door, there was a man with a trumpet sitting in the pew against the back wall. The timing could not have been more perfect. The moment I walked in, he began playing the chicken dance song. I turned my head before I realized what was happened and made direct eye contact. I gave him a confused look and then slowly left. I left very confused, as it was 6 a.m. I spent most of the day thinking about that brief interaction. I don't know what religion he was a part of, but I want to join it. Story 42. I was once in the Yukon in May a bunch of years back. I was there for the breakup of the Yukon River. The size of the giant chunks of ice that was dislodged and started flowing was incredible. I was walking on the frozen river, then 5 minutes later, house-sized pieces of ice crashing into each other and destroying anything in their way. Story 43 was with my then fiancée, now wife, Christmas shopping on 11/2005. We go to Suncoast trying to think of gift ideas, leave, and as we're about to round the corner, my wife stops us in our tracks, saying she just thought of getting Friends season DVDs for a friend. So we make our way back into Suncoast, and seconds later, a mass shooter opened fire. We were walking directly to where the shooter opened fire, so would have been like right in front of him when he began shooting had we not turned back. He'll never forget the sounds of the echoes as the gunshots rang out, the people screaming. Pretty sure as I ran out to herd old ladies frozen in place into the store that I saw some people get shot. I had ran into a coworker minutes before the attack. He saw much more than I did and was quite affected by it. He was this big trucker guy that always acted tough. I saw him after he came back to work and he started crying when I asked if he was okay. We got locked in the Suncoast for a bit, listening to the gunfire and screams as a Suncoast promo film was playing and Christmas music in the background. It was quite eerie. I and others initially thought maybe it was a gang thing, as mass shootings weren't as much a thing back then. But as the shots kept ringing off, the people screaming, we realized we were fish in a barrel. So we yell at the Suncoast employees to let us out the back. I think we left as hostages were being taken at the nearby Sam Goody. We're filing out the back with cops' cars surrounding us, more incoming. People all over outside, some crying, some screaming. It was intense and we missed it by seconds thanks to some friends' DVDs. Info. Answer. Not as close of an encounter, but this reminds me of the time I went to the second day, Saturday, of a 3-day event with my dad and seeing on the Sunday night news that there was a mass shooting at the end of the third day. It was so crazy thinking about how if we hadn't made the decision to go on Saturday rather than Sunday, we would have been caught up in it. Kind of crazy because we were in the same area at the same time that the shooting took place the day before. Hope you and your wife are well. Info. Story 44. I saw a log truck lose its load when it took an off-ramp too fast, just as I was coming up the main road. It was super surreal. Like it was happening in slow motion, the log bunk just started lean halfway down the ramp before tilting completely sideways. Luckily, there was a large enough gap of sloped grass that people had plenty of warning to stop or speed up. As far as I recall, there were no damages other than the truck. Story 45. I slept next to a dead guy in hospital a whole night. I knew something was up when I went to the bathroom and the room stank, but somehow a part of me couldn't take it in until the morning check at 8 a.m. came in and one of the nurses went over to him and was obviously shook. Then they told me they had to clean the room today, so they had to move me out. Yeah, they messed up and didn't want to admit it. I will never forget that imagery of him across from me. Story 46. This is a bit long, but hopefully worth it. Where I live, there is a castle just down the road. The lord of the area still lives there. Has a bit younger than me, and our sons attended the local state primary school together and became friends. I became friends with his dad. He's a normal bloke, just knows who his ancestors were for 800 years. He gets invited to a lot of stuff and was invited to take part in a local regatta. In a rowing race, there would be him, the invitee, and he needed 2 more rowers. It was a paired relay. He asked me if I would do it. I said I would, but explained that I sail but don't really row. That was fine. It was just for fun. Another rower was found. We were to row the first leg together. The other rower and I only met on the evening of the race, and it wasn't until we were on the water that I realized he was taking this seriously. Bless him, he soon had to temper his expectations when he saw how bad I was. He made no fuss at the change in approach but coached me along. We came in last for the changeover. It turned out that this guy was a gold medalist in the British Rowing Championships. The second leg didn't go any better. Our other pair were also very amateur, and we were competing with, obviously enough, seasoned rowers. We were last by a long way. We stayed for the presentation of cups. The Lord Mayor of the town was presenting these. By chance, his wife had previously been my teaching assistant, and there was a cup for the first boat that entered from a local town, not the town where the regatta was, There was only one boat from there, us. So, there I was. With a lord of the realm, a British gold medalist and a local historian, being presented with a cup despite coming dead last by the wife of the Lord Mayor, who had previously been my teaching assistant, for rowing, my first time in about 20 years. Not my usual day. Story 47. I went horseback riding in Iceland once, with about 8 other people. It was the first and only time I rode a horse. Such a lovely experience. At the end, when all the horses were back in their fenced yard and unsaddled, they all simultaneously began rolling around on the ground, like dogs that wanted belly rubs. It was the only time in my life that I actually wondered if I was dreaming, because it was so fudge bizarre. Story 48. I was on a long-haul bus journey years ago in my early 20s. A guy about my age got on halfway through and sat beside me. He didn't speak, just pointed to his ear and shook his head. Deaf. We ended up communicating by typing messages on our phones, showing each other our screens. I let him read the magazine I had with me. It was oddly quiet but comfortable. Just before he got off, he asked my name. I showed him my ID. He stared at it a moment too long. As he stood up to leave, he pulled out his wallet and showed me his own ID. Same name, first and last. Story 49. On a beautiful, almost autumn Tuesday morning, I was driving my BF at the time to work. We used to love to drive with the radio off and would just talk. We started to see people pulled over on the side of the expressway looking sick. Not just one car, but multiple cars were pulling over. I felt my hair raise at the back of my neck and pulled over. Turning on the radio, I heard the DJ sobbing on air. That is when I learned about the planes hitting the towers. That is when I realized my BF would probably be called to duty. That is when I realized my best friend worked in the second tower. That is the day my life changed, and I can remember how surreal it all felt for the next few weeks. It was like walking around in a haze of grief and disbelief, pain, and compassion for everyone. Story 50. My son Lucas was traveling on a random bus in the rainforest in Central America. When a girl said, "Hi, Adam," he said, "Sorry, my name is Lucas, but I have a brother called Adam." It turns out she worked with his brother in London. Story 51. I once loaned a copy of a book my dad had written to my BF at the time. It was a special edition to me because my father had signed it, dedicating it to my grandparents. The BF dumped me. I asked him for that book back several times, but he never even replied. Years later, I decided I wanted a copy of my dad's book anyway, but it was no longer in print, so I bought it used off Amazon. When the book arrived, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was the book that I had loaned to my BF with my dad's signature. BF had sold it to a used bookstore who listed it online. Story 52. Tiju say when I reported that I was gang violation to my command, and they threatened to have me court-martialed for underage drinking and making a false report. I was 18, serving overseas, and had been in bed asleep when they broke into my barracks room. I didn't drink. You see it on the news and hear whispers, but when the reality sets in that no one is going to help you despite doing everything right, it feels like an alternate reality. Story 53. I met my childhood best friend again in a Chinese restaurant in my hometown. His dad had abducted him and taken him to London when we were in the 4th grade. I had moved with my mom to Arizona when I was in my sophomore year of high school. During the summer between my junior and senior year, I went to my home state to visit my hometown and see my family. My grandma and I went to go pick up some Chinese food, and there's my buddy cleaning tables. We cried when we saw each other. It was shocking. I had been friends with him for 2 years in grade school. He was one of my first friends and the only person who I invited to my 9th birthday party. IDK. Crazy stuff. Story 54. My sister and I are 8 years apart. She's older. When I was in 11th grade, we had to read The Great Gatsby. She loves the book and movie and even has a tattoo for it. When you get a book from school, you have to write your name in it. So if you misplace it, someone should know who it belongs to. Well, when I got my copy, the start of the unit, I flipped it open and got my sister's copy and saw her name handwritten 8 years later. So cool. Story 55. I was camping alone in the Howe Rainforest in Washington State. I'm about 6-ish miles from any civilization, camped right next to a river. I get nicely tipsy and high, while the sun is setting and the river picks up its pace. I then start hearing what sounds like a basketball being dropped from a large height and bouncing until it stopped, except it was so much louder than a basketball and was literally echoing around the forest. All through the night, the noise kept recurring over and over until I passed out. In the morning, didn't hear anything. Edit. So it was a giant boulder being pushed by the river, and the bouncing noise was it settling back down. Story 56. The most bizarre thing happened to me in Vancouver, Me and my best friend were walking down the street and joked it'd be hilarious if the dog father, locally famous hot dog vendor in Halifax all the way in the East Coast, is at 711. I shoot you not at the exact same time I said it, he was there. Story 57. Driving the band home after a gig in the wee hours of the morning, I turned a corner, down the tiny alley where our sound guy lived, and standing in the middle of the street, holding a bunch of balloons, was 7F's tall Winnie the fucking Pooh. He just fucking waved at us. I stopped and asked, everyone else sees this shoot, right? Indeed they did. I drove around him slowly, and it was obviously a dude in a suit, but why there? It's a small goddamn town. Why 4 a.m.? Why Pooh Bear? Story 58. Waking up from a 3-month coma. Like my brain couldn't comprehend that 3 months had passed. I still don't remember a week or so prior to the incident. I spent a solid week after waking up trying to figure out what was real, what wasn't. I still have trauma from it 2 years later. Story 59. Somebody committed tragic end in front of me by jumping off a multi-story car park. They landed right in front of me. I didn't believe what I saw. I shouted over to bloke working in car park to ask him, but he didn't see. Had to literally stand over body to take it in. Answer. Something similar happened to my dad when he was driving on the motorway. A guy jumped off an overhead bridge and landed right by my dad's door. He waited with him while the ambulance arrived. He was taken to hospital and survived. My dad isn't really an emotional person, but he came to my house afterwards and sat on the stairs and cried. He didn't know at the time the guy would survive. I had to ring his boss and tell him he couldn't be in the next day, and he avoids driving under that bridge now and will take another route. Story 60. This was about 2 decades ago, but it was so uncanny that I can remember it like yesterday. My friend Josh and I were playing hooky from school. We had both feigned illnesses for the day, and when our parents had left for work, we met up. Didn't really have a plan, but we wanted a Ferris Bueller-style day of shenanigans. That's when we heard the news that a terrorist group called Al-Qaeda had flown a passenger airplane into the World Trade Center. Story 61. Actually, 2 moments with the same person. One, I wrote on Twitter how much I loved her first book and that I borrowed it multiple times from the library. She then wrote me a DM and asked for my address because she wanted to give me the book as a present, and she did, with a handwritten message. Or no. 2, I'm currently reading her new book and Googled something she wrote about. I couldn't find anything about it and decided to contact her on Blue Sky. That was yesterday. She wrote about a certain rapper being in jail because of pedophilic crimes. Turns out she confused 2 rappers. And she thanked me a ton because printing of the 2nd edition will start tomorrow. Story 62. When I showed up to a performance and my fiancé was proposing to me, it felt insane that he got the timing perfectly correct so that I didn't catch him before I was meant to understand. It was a lot of moving parts and he pulled it off. Story 63. This happened to my grandfather, not me. He was on a train to Bluefield, WV, and he met a pretty girl and started talking to her. They got off the train together and he said, well, I'm going to see my grandmother. And she said, well, I am too. And they both headed off in the same direction. Turns out they had the same grandmother, but had never met each other. Story 64. When a hot girl delivered a pizza to me and I thought nothing of it except, she was too hot to be delivering pizzas. Then the next day she texted me to tell me I was cute and ask if I was single, having jacked my number from my order. Then the next day she was in my bed. Now we've been dating for 2 months. The whole thing has been so intense and also smooth that I keep waiting for something to go horribly wrong. Story 65. When I was going through the aftermath of my husband attacking me, he had been getting very hostile the days leading up to the attack. I had texted my dad, 2,000 miles away the day before it happened, because I just had a bad feeling. If I ended up missing or dead, I wanted someone to know why. I talked about it in a comment yesterday. I went back and reread my posts from years ago I was making on Reddit in real time as everything happened that day to document it. It was such a weird feeling because I was absolutely panicked, but at the same time felt like everything was moving in slow motion, like a weird dream, and along with the panic was a sense of relief. I think it was the shock of knowing how close I came to not being here, and I made it out alive. Story 66. Watching a game of football at the Theater of Dreams itself, Selhurst Park. A big chance happens that ends with a player injured. While he receives treatment, a replay of the incident is shown on the big screen, revealing that what appeared to be a shot on goal was actually a mishit that bounced off his knee. There is general noise as the crowd is murmuring conversation, but every person talking in that stadium says the word knee at the same time, creating a strange, weirdly loud, but at the same time quiet moment. Badly described, but it was so odd. Story 67. When I was a kid, my parents would drag me to a Japanese art gallery. We lived in Okinawa military. There would be an artist there that would do a procession of techniques, then raffle off the piece at the end of the demonstration. Upon arrival, one would put their name in a fishbowl, and someone in the audience would put the winner. I would often be the only kid in attendance, 78-ish. So one time they let me pick the winner. I pulled my own name. Little me was literally stunned into silence. So I showed my dad, and he announced to the crowd I was the winner. I still have that tiger head print 30 years later. Story 68. I once dropped about 150 grade of acid on the beach late around 2 in the morning. I was chilling, relaxing on a sand dune, feeling the warm ocean breeze and being one with the universe, when suddenly about 30 people all came onto the beach together, not 100 feet away from me. They each had one of those 200 lightsabers, the really nice ones that left color trails in air, and they started having an all-out lightsaber brawl right there. They were running around making big elaborate maneuvers and yelling catchphrases and just generally whacking their friends with glee. It lasted for over an hour before they packed it in, an hour of lights and colors. I was awestruck. There was no way they could see me. It was very dark, and I was tucked into the reeds on my dune, like it was a show for my singular enjoyment. They must have been part of a Star Wars club at the local university, and they'll never know there was a witness to their performance, but I will forever be grateful. Story 69. I was on vacation in Kos, Greece, and lost my hotel keys in a club. When I was looking for my keys the next evening, a bartender gave them to me. A month later, after a 2-year break, I happened to be playing League of Legends with an old internet acquaintance, and he told me that he was traveling a lot to earn money. He told me that he had waited tables in clubs in Kos, for example. I told him that I was on vacation in Kos, and a waiter kindly gave me back my keys after I had lost them. It turned out that he was the waiter. The world is a village. Story 70. Summer 2002, our American football team had a summer trip to London, Paris. First night in London, the restaurants closed in our area earlier than we expected. 5 of us, 19-year-old American idiots, were walking around trying to find a place to eat. We asked a guy walking by us if he knew anywhere. Turns out he was American and doing the same thing. No big deal. We went our separate ways. 11 days later, we saw him at the airport in Philadelphia. It was surreal. A complete stranger on a random street in London, to 11 days later, a familiar face in an airport 3,500 miles away. It was wild. Story 71. I moved to a new apartment in Paris, and I received packages with meds in it. The address was mine. The name was mine. I quickly found that there was a pharmacy substances store right next to me. The address was the same somehow, and the owner had the exact same name as mine, first name and surname. Story 72. My precious niece at 4 years old came out of my grip. She went running in a parking lot. She went to a random man who looked like had a date at the time. She yelled, "Daddy." His date looked in shock, about to end it right then. I picked my niece up and had to say in a quick way that they aren't related. I had to leave as the man is still confused at what's going on, and the date had a sigh of relief. Story 73. I checked a book out of the library in the greater Seattle area, and someone had left a CC receipt in it as a bookmark. I knew the person slightly, not like we were friends, reading the same books or anything like that. Very random. Story 74. Not trying to get political, but John 6. I was 16 in my civics class when suddenly my teacher starts freaking out and puts the news on the projector for us to watch. My hometown was very southern, so half the class was staring in horror crying, and the other half were cheering and trying to start fights. I didn't know what could happen next as we were watching in real time. It felt so out of body. Secondly, my dad suddenly got COVID at 38 and died of COVID pneumonia. It didn't feel real. I just turned 18, moved out for college. My high school BF cheated and dumped me, and my childhood dog died. I didn't believe he was gone until I went to the funeral and kissed his head. Living bodies are warm, but my dad was always warmer than the average person. I knew he'd be colder. I didn't expect freezer cold. It hit me he was really gone, and his body is just what was left. Absolutely lost it. Story 75. When I saw my father die in front of my eyes, I was so shocked when the paramedics tried to console me. I had to bury my face in my hands to hide the fact that I wasn't crying. It just hadn't registered yet. It felt so surreal. One moment he's there, another he's not. Story 76. My grandfather, who lived in Arizona, happened to show up at my house in Maryland when I was packing my car to leave my abusive husband, who happened to come home as I was packing the car. After I told him what was happening, he asked what I needed. At the time, I didn't have any money to get gas or get through the PA turnpike tolls to get to my mom's house 3 hours away. So he gave me all the cash he had on him and made sure I finished packing and drove off. Turns out he was in town for a funeral. He saved me that day. I know my ex-husband would have tried to eliminate me if my grandfather hadn't been there. Story 77. Before my brother died, I never knew about the whole surreal concept of feeling like everything is normal because you have not yet fully realized that someone you love is gone forever. I now understand it is very common. For me, the thought of my brother no longer being on the receiving end of any texts I sent him, when the last one I had from him was still very recent, was hard to grasp. Story 78. I once went to grab some wings for me and my then girlfriend. While stopped at a light, a woman around my age who I've never met waved and said hi to me from her car, even called me by name. As I was leaving Wingstop with my order, I held the door open for 2 other girls entering the store. When I walked past them, each of them said hi to me and knew my name. Sometimes I wonder if they were friends of my ex who put them up to it, but they weren't any friends she ever told me about if so.